you can bring a bag. To, like, employees can have lunch with a plastic bag. We'll allow that. As long as you're not a point of sale. As long as we're not a point of sale. There we go. We did do the. Did we approve the agenda for the special meeting? No, we couldn't do that either. Yeah, because we didn't have a quorum. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. That's good. All right, I'm going to call to order the public session of the September 12th Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency meeting here, and thank you all for joining us. We had the call to order earlier. Thank you, Vice Chair Marble. We now have a quorum now that I've joined us. First is approval of the special meeting agenda.
Joe, one thing I just remember before you move on, just let the record indicate we did not take any action in closed session.
Perfect, thanks. So we've completed our closed session, which was item 4. There's no reportable action out of the closed session. Thank you, Dick. We'll now approve the agenda for the special meeting. This special meeting takes the place of the September 19th regular meeting of the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency Board. I'd like to ask our Executive Director if there's any alterations to the agenda as we have before us.
None to suggest, no.
Okay. Anything from my colleagues? Have moved approval.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The agenda is approved. Moving to item 3, public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to address us on an item not on the agenda, or if there's something on the agenda but you must leave, feel free to come forward. Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll move now to item 5, post-closed session announcement. I think that's on here to announce that we took no action in closed session. Okay, and they'll move to consent items on the agenda, items 6, A, B, and C. Any questions for staff on any of those 3 items, including the minutes of our July 15th meeting?
Move approval.
Okay. Moved by Vice Chair Marbles, seconded by Director Davies. Correct? Okay. Any discussion? Anything you'd like to add, Dennis, before we vote?
No, you do have a financing update, but I'll be covering that under the next item.
Okay, good. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. We'll now go to the update by our General Manager, Dennis Niemer. Dennis, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have just a brief update for you this afternoon. We've actually made quite a bit of progress since our last meeting in July, in particular progress on our DBO procurement process, our environmental and permitting efforts, our grant and loan funding, and our property rights. So I'll be highlighting those as we go through the presentation. Talk about what we've accomplished recently, some of our upcoming milestones, and then finish with our schedule. Since our meeting in July, we did receive a priced proposal from CH Twin Hill on July 30th, and based on our review to date, the proposal does appear to be responsive. We haven't finished our review, but we're making good progress, and the negotiations are continuing. Under the topic of grants and loans, we have now submitted 2 applications, one to the Clean Water SRF, and that's administered by the State Water Resources Control Board, and that application is for all of the regional facilities, and it totals $211 million. That includes the cost of the DBO work as well as all of the regional costs that the agency has incurred to date. In addition, Woodland has submitted an application for their portion of the regional facilities as well as their local facilities. That's been submitted to the Safe Drinking Water SRF, and that's administered by the Health Department. As we've discussed in the past, Woodland has been determined by the Health Department to be eligible for the loans because of their nitrate contamination problems. In the case of Davis, their nitrate problems are not as severe. They have been offered eligibility if they can effect a consolidation with North Davis Meadows or some other CSA. So that that effort is continuing. In the meantime, we are continuing to pursue a state commitment for intake funding. As you'll recall, we did receive $10 million in the current state budget, and the next order of business is to get a commitment from the state for the remaining funds. So we've got a plan and an effort underway to secure that commitment. And then finally, the West Side Integrated Regional Water Management Plan, the agency's project submitted a request for $2 million for supplemental grant funding on the intake, and we expect to hear back on that request sometime this month or early next month. We have issued a request.
Yes, do you want to take questions while you go along?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just go to the last slide. So we're down to basically $6 million more that we're looking at for the intake facility. Would the IRWMP $2 million count against that $6 million, or would
no? That would be
no.
That would go against the portion of the project that is either non-grant eligible or is considered agency cost.
Okay, thanks.
And I should also mention that we have received official notification recently that the federal government has included an additional $5 million in this year's budget. So whereas before they committed to the full 16.7, they appropriated 8.35, they've added $5 million to that. So they're up to 12.35 million in money that's already been committed. So in total with the 10 million, we're up to over $23 million that's been secured. We did issue a request for qualifications for construction quality assurance firms. This is the firm that's going to help oversee the construction management on the project. We hope to bring that back to the board within the next couple of months. And we are continuing to perform an energy analysis and efficiency analysis regarding the use of energy, and we've hired the firm Terra Verde to do that. So that work continues. Under environmental and permitting, as I said, we have made some significant progress here. We have received the biological opinion from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we've been notified by the National Marine Fisheries Service that their biological opinion is pending. We hope to have that in the next 2 to 3 weeks. That is undergoing final review, as we've been told, in their Long Beach office. We have completed sampling for our microbial aerosol study, and a draft report will be forthcoming shortly. You'll recall this is a study that was commissioned in response to the health department's wanting assurances that there were no pathogens or contaminants of concern leaving the wastewater site and making their way to the water treatment plant. We continue to work with RD 2035 on securing WAPA power for the intake, and we're working with PG&E to define the improvements that we need to make at the intake as well as the regional water treatment facility. And finally, we have reached an agreement with Yolo County regarding encroachment permit conditions. We've reached agreement on the post paving requirements, particularly along Road 102, and we've also reached an agreement to allow for the shutdown of County Road 22 to permit the contractor to install our raw water piping under the levees. We have reached agreement with the property owners listed here. Heidrich McGinnis for Davis Finished Water Pipeline. Oates, we had been negotiating for 3 parcels near the intake and along the raw water pipeline alignment. Alamar for property near the intake site. The board will recall that this was one that you had previously approved eminent domain action for. However, that's not going to be, is no longer necessary. We were able to negotiate an agreement with Alamar. That's also been referred to in the past as the Turner property. And then finally, a fairly significant milestone, we have finalized all of the agreements with CPG for the property acquisition at the intake site, as well as all of the easements across Conway Ranch. So this leaves us in a very good position with respect to the property rights that are required for the project. I'll get back to that in a minute, but we're down to just 2 properties that are left to be acquired. You have an item later on your agenda to revise the Sierra Northern Railroad easements, and that'll be talked about more in an upcoming item. In terms of planning, design, and construction, we have done an evaluation of solids handling alternatives for the regional water treatment facility site. That information is being presented to Woodland, and we're hoping to get some direction on where to locate those drying facilities here in the next week or so. We've reviewed contractor pre-qualifications, the document that will spell out the qualifications required for the intake facility, and we've provided the intake designer, Montgomery Watson Harza, with our design criteria for our pumps and electrical gear so that they can include that in the intake contract documents. So that's what's happened since July. Looking ahead, in the next couple of months, we'll continue to aggressively pursue our SRF loan applications. We have been told that from both the Health Department for the Safe Drinking Water Act, SRF, as well as the state board staff for the Clean Water, that we should be in a position to receive a loan offer in early November. So that we are going to work very hard to maintain that schedule. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to follow through to obtain the state commitment letter for the remaining share of the grant funds at the intake, our efforts to secure WAPA power, and to continue to develop the ASR program, in particular the work that's underway with Woodland. We have commissioned a value for money analysis. You may recall this was commissioned several months ago. We will bring that back to the board next month for your review and consideration. That analysis basically will compare the costs and savings and risk profiles of a design bid build, a traditional design bid build procurement versus a design build or design build operate procurement. And we're hoping that that study will demonstrate and quantify the savings associated with the methodology that we've selected. We're hopeful that the City of Davis will resolve their water rate lawsuit or otherwise confirm their ability to finance their portion of the project. And we have a couple of agreements to finalize with Reclamation District 2035. Operations agreement basically gets into the details of how the operations will work and how the operating costs will be shared, and a similar agreement about related to the intake, primarily the construction, how the costs will be shared, change orders will be handled, and that sort of thing. And we plan to bring those 2 agreements back to the board next month. Finally, we're I think on the downhill side of all of our environmental and permitting requirements. Once we get the biological opinion from NIMS, it will put us in a position to just kind of march through most of the remaining permits that you see on this page, the most significant of which is the Section 404 permit. A lot of these other permits trigger off of having that 404 permit in place. So once we get the BO from NIMS, I think these other ones will fall in place rather quickly. Next month you'll have another CEQA addendum for your consideration related to the air quality impacts. We've updated the air quality impacts based on the current project and sizing and construction schedule, so that's just to document the reduction in air emissions that result from the current project. And we hope to complete our microbial aerosol study at the regional water treatment plant site and provide that to the board in the next meeting or 2. With land and right-of-way acquisitions, we have the Riverbank Road condemnation or eminent domain. The board will recall that's the Elkhorn development property. That's a friendly condemnation. It's just the owner could not be identified, so we're using the court process to secure title to that property. We need to finalize the escrow for the water treatment facility site from the City of Woodland for the pad that's already been filled. And finally, The last two property rights are shown here, the transverse easement from the railroad and a Lillard property. Lillard is the owner of a piece of property where the Davis treated water pipeline traverses. So we're very close to having all of the property rights needed for the project in hand. We have some more work to do to complete a closure coordination plan for Road 22 with the Yolo County Farm Bureau. We'll be working on that over the next couple of months. We'll be shortlisting the construction quality assurance, construction management firms, bringing that, as I said earlier, to the board in the next couple of meetings. The plan is still to, next month on October 10th, bring forward the design, build, operate contract to the board for your consideration. And we're working very hard to put all the pieces in place to get that recommendation finalized. We'll also begin pre-qualifying intake construction firms in October. That effort will be led by RD 2035, but we're essentially complete with the design. First step would be to pre-qualify contractors. Once that pre-qualified list is established, then we would go out for bids for that project with the goal of having that contract awarded next spring, and that'll allow us to keep that portion of the project on schedule. So last couple of final slides. This is the DBO Procurement Schedule. We're down to the last line item here with the board consideration of the service contract award on October 10th. All of the preceding line items have been completed. And as you've seen before, that award of the DBO contract, if it occurs in October, puts us in place to maintain our current completion schedule of September of 2016. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Dennis. Questions from members of the board?
I'm good.
Sid, Bill, Skip?
No question.
I'm fine as well. I mean, everything seems to be moving along quite well. Dennis, thank you very, very much. Okay, this brings us any questions from members of the audience with regard to the update? Okay. With that, we move to the consideration of the capital asset policy. And good, I look over and Paul's here. That's fantastic.
Right.
So unless Dennis wants to kick it off, Paul, this is your item.
I think I'll just turn over to Paul. This is an item that came out of a recent audit, and this is an attempt on the agency's part to comply with that suggestion from the audit.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, there's not much to it. As we say in the staff report, as a result of the 11-12 fiscal year audit, there were two findings, one of which was a recommendation that the JPA formally adopt a capital asset policy that, without getting into the technical accounting, is important, and it will help govern how we record, track, and report the finances for the agency, particularly as we're moving into the next phase of the project. Although it's a fairly extensive policy, I do note that in looking at the existing policies that are in place both at the City of Davis and the City of Woodland, rather than reinvent the wheel on this, and because the City of Davis continues to be the official depository of our funds and the tracking, we've modified a policy that is already in place and works for the City of Davis. We've modified it slightly for the JPA's needs, and it's, I believe, consistent and will meet the needs of not only the agency but the requirements of the audit and the auditors. So we're recommending your consideration of adoption of this policy going forward. And I would just add that it's probably a little bit more extensive than maybe what was required in the audit, but it does get into some areas that will be important for the agency as we start constructing the project and operations, just in terms of ensuring that we have good accountability and controls for the capital assets that will not only be constructed and maintained, but also need to make sure we're covering areas like inventory and the like. So unless there's any questions, we would recommend that the board adopt the policy, and we can refine it as we go as the project evolves.
Any public comment on this item? Okay. There being none, any questions or comments from members of the board?
I'll move the item.
Yeah, seems
Second?
seems good to be following the precedent that we've got here and so on. So moved by Director Davies, seconded by Vice Chair Marble. Discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. We move now to item 9 on the agenda. This is a public hearing concerning the proposed resolution declaring necessity for and authorizing commencement of eminent domain proceedings respecting a pipeline easement in Sierra Northern Railway property and superseding resolution number 2013-03. I'd like to ask Dick Shanahan to introduce the item, and then I'll formally open the public hearing. Dick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item is a follow-up to an item considered by the board last April concerning easements across Sierra Northern Railway property. At the time in April, the board approved a resolution authorizing eminent domain acquisition of essentially 5 separate easement areas, 2 of them involving permanent, 4 of the areas rather involving permanent and temporary longitudinal easements along Road 22. As you may recall from April and other discussions, the discussions with the railroad had been contentious. The agency and the railroad had been far apart on valuation of particularly those longitudinal easements. So what happened after the April resolution of necessity, the agency staff and its engineers, in consultation with CH2M Hill representatives, met again with the County of Yolo, which previously had opposed full road closures on Road 22 because of concerns about traffic impacts. We met again with the County of Yolo staff and were able to work out an arrangement with County of Yolo staff by which the county will allow temporary full road closures, which will give us enough space for the contractor to work in to dig the large pits necessary to put the pipeline underneath the levees and in that area. After that analysis and discussions with the county, it was concluded that we don't need those longitudinal easements any longer. The 5th easement area is an easement area involving an undercrossing or a transverse easement to get from the intake site on the Sacramento River to our Road 22 alignment. There's no way but to get underneath the railroad at some point, and so the undercrossing is absolutely essential. And so what's left is for the staff proposal is just to pursue the transverse easement underneath the railroad near the intake site. The agenda packet contains a staff report that explains this background in more detail, and it includes a proposed resolution of necessity, which is very similar to the one you did in April, except that it is now limited to the one transverse easement area. In a letter on August 26, 2013, the agency sent a letter to the attorney for the railroad informing them of our intent to adopt this revised resolution of necessity and explaining the background of the changes since April and it no longer being necessary to get the longitudinal easements. We received a response letter from the railroad's attorney on September 10th. A copy of that has been provided to the directors. There is a counteroffer in that letter, and what I want to stress is that our recommendation is that the board authorize staff to proceed with eminent domain, and we then direct our eminent domain counsel to proceed with that lawsuit. Concurrently, on a dual track, we will continue negotiations with the railroad in a hope that eventually there can be an amicable resolution of the single remaining easement area. So those things we propose will continue on dual tracks. For this public hearing, I recommend that the board open the public hearing and first ask if there's any comments from representatives for the railroad, and if not, or after you've heard from the railroad, then get comments from other members of the public. Finally, you can ask questions of staff and then proceed to your deliberations and consideration of the resolution. Any questions of me or other staff?
Nope, okay. I'd like to, if there's any representative from the railroad that would like to speak to this item, I'd like to invite you to come forward. Yep, thanks, Skip. I will officially open the public hearing. Very good. Is there a representative of the railroad that would like to address us? There being none, are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this matter? No? Okay. And then this isn't, I'm closing this at this point then. Okay, I will now close the public hearing on this item. Are there questions from the board to staff on this item?
I'd like to move adoption of the resolution as requested by staff, superseding resolution number 2013-03.
Second.
Very good. Any discussion? All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 3-0. With that, we move to the long-range calendar. Dennis?
Yes, Chairman Corboza, board members, you have in your packet a long-range board calendar. I want to just draw your attention to our meeting on October the 10th. That's a meeting change from October 17th, but that will be a very important meeting where we will be asking the board to consider awarding of the DBO service contract, and there's a number of additional items in support of the project and our maintaining of the schedule. So that will be a very important meeting, and hopefully in November, as I mentioned in my earlier report, we'll be bringing the board a request to approve SRF funding agreements. So the next 2 months are going to be important meetings in terms of maintaining our schedule and meeting some of our primary goals.
Okay. Any questions of staff?
On the calendar, Dennis, is there any, I'm here on October 10th. I don't want you to slip it a week because I'm not here the next week. So if, I can't avoid that. So I just wanted you to make that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're aware that the board's availability is not is a problem on the 17th. So we're going to do everything we can to maintain the current schedule.
Good. Fantastic. Anybody else? Any questions from the audience on the long-range calendar? Okay. All right, 11, correspondence. Anything other than the letter from the railroad that we need
No,
to
we didn't.
acknowledge?
We had not received any other correspondence this month,
Okay.
in the last 2 months, I should say.
Very good. Technical Advisory Committee comments? Anything from Doug or Herb?
Just as a clarification item, in Dennis Deemer's report, he talked about the SRF application. The application that went in does include our local improvements or pipelines and tanks. We've started the design process for the transmission lines, and the southwest storage tank is currently under construction now. So that's the update we have.
Very good. Herb? Great. All right, with that, any board member comments? No? I think before we meet next time, and I will acknowledge that Bill and I and Dennis, you might want to fill in anything else you know, or Bill, what you know, there will be another lobbying trip to Washington, D.C. on October 7 and 8 to further our case for the intake funding, which is going very, very well, but we want to not take any chances there and redouble our efforts. So that's coming up. I wanted to acknowledge that. Anything to add on that, Dennis, at all?
No, it's a continuation of our successful trips in the past. Bob Thomas from Reclamation District 2035, our partner on the joint intake, will be part of that delegation. And our goal will be to secure the remaining, $4 million that the federal government has promised but not yet fully committed.
Perfect. Okay. Bill's good.
Are we going to be engaging the state on the 6.6 million
Yes.
in the near future with Jared again, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And we've had some discussions with Jared. We've got a plan to lay the groundwork at the staff level, and then at some point, we would want to make sure we involve the board in making sure that we get that letter.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Skip, you good? I'm good. Sid, anything? Okay, thanks for, with that, I'm going to adjourn the September 12th meeting of the Woodland Davis Clean Water Agency, and thank you all for joining us. Look forward to seeing everybody on October 10,
Yep.
if not sooner.